So we're going to talk about indie film finance and distribution. There's a lot more to it than where do I find the money. It's technically pretty easy to make a movie these days. I mean, you can even make, what you could call a movie with your iPhone. It doesn't really matter if nobody ever sees it. So a big trick besides getting the money together and physically making the movie is how do you distribute it? Perhaps even more important is to get a return on investment if you ever want to make another movie again. So let me tell you about the diverse panel that's going to help us figure out indie film finance and distribution. First, to my immediate right is Adrian Ward. He brings 27 years of entertainment banking experience to the panel. He's currently one of the team leads of Banc of California, entertainment banking group specializing in film and television production financing. Then we have Briana Hill. I know you can guess which one she is. She's an attorney at the LA offices of Cowan, DeBaets, Abrams, Sheppard, LLP. She has extensive experience in the legal aspects of entertainment and other creative industries with an emphasis on television, motion picture, and digital media, including negotiating talent deals, rights acquisitions, and licensing agreements, as well as serving as outside business affairs for independent television, motion picture, and digital media studios and production companies. That's a lot. And last but certainly not least is James C. Walker. He's the president of the film distribution company, Lightning Entertainment. Prior to Lightning in 2015, he worked as an indie producer, so he's been on both sides of the table. Double duty for James here on this panel. He founded Walking West Entertainment, which produced the highly successful indie feature Break. It starred Stephen Dorff and Tom Berenger, and it was photographed by yours truly. He went on to produce Why We Ride alongside Brian H. Carroll, a documentary exploring the culture of motorcycle enthusiasts and their deep affection for the sport. So I would like to start by asking each of you, when should you get involved in the project? And I think, from our previous conversations, you're going to say pretty early on, but at what point? Let's start with you, James. When should somebody come to you if they want to get a movie made?
We like to take a look at a project when there is a solid producing team and director attached and a casting plan. You may not have your cast. Most of the time you won't have, but at least a casting plan and an idea of your finance plan. So before you maybe make your offers or go any further down on development, we like to come aboard at that point. At script stage, a little too early for us, but definitely your producer, director, and an idea of who you want to star in your film.
And Briana, when would you get involved?
As soon as you say to your friend, hey, let's make a movie. I like to say there's no quicker way to ruin a friendship than making an independent film together. You want to not only who's going to do what, but also you want to make sure that you have the rights for the project, because there's nothing worse than getting to this stage and realizing, oh, I don't have the rights to produce this screenplay as a film. So
try to get the mic a little closer.
So I'd say when you start putting the pieces together is when you should start talking to a lawyer. And the lawyer might say, come back in 6 months, come back when you have a better idea of how you're going to assemble this. But mistakes that are made early on can cost more down the road in legal fees when you have to clean it up.
What are some of the other things that you provide? What other services throughout the process?
So to break it into the development stage, you would get information on how to structure your relationships with your other producers, be it a co-production agreement, a joint venture. You can attach talent to your film. You can acquire the rights to the underlying materials, whether it be by an option agreement or a straight out acquisition, or you might hire a writer, in which case you want to work for a hire agreement. And then as you proceed through development, let's say you get your funding in place, you have your talent attached, you're going to make your movie. Well, then you need to hire everybody else. So everyone needs to have agreements to work on the crew. You need to do your union agreements to get, if you're doing a union project, SAG, DGA, WGA, et cetera. So there's the production legal component. And then we always recommend, and I'll let you speak to the finance component, but we always recommend when you get to distribution, don't try to negotiate your own distribution agreement. There are a lot of pitfalls involved in that process. And to bring it back to the beginning, the rights you have for the screenplay come into play again when you're doing a distribution agreement, because you need to know what rights you have in order to parse them out among the different platforms or exhibitors.
Adrian, when do you get involved in a project, or when do you like to?
I actually prefer to get involved pretty early on. We have a lot of projects that are just, a script or even an idea and a dream. Because, we're going to give you a bit of a roadmap as to what we do. And so just like on the legal side, decisions you take early on may have ramifications, down the road. And if you give away, rights over here, I might not be able to lend against, something that you think is lendable down the road. So, we'll start a file very early on, but I look at it as later on, there's a point at which I'm going to be more useful to you as a producer. So that point is generally when you've got a sales company on board or a distributor, and then we can talk meaningfully about, the value of pre-sales or tax credits and things like that. And then I can do some real, crunch some numbers for you and show you, what it's going to cost and how that's going to look. And generally these days, it'll also tell you how much money you still need to get from an investor or another source to make up, the rest of the budget.
So a lot of the lending is done after the production has been completed. Is that what I'm hearing?
No. Just in terms of the the financial model. I mean, all of our funding eventually goes into the production.
Okay.
So yeah.
Very good. How does it break down? What are some of the points you lend at? Is it like negative pickup deal, or they still do those?
Yeah, there's not many of those around. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I guess the modern version of that now that we see more than anything is, Netflix and maybe a little bit of Amazon and Hulu, where they'll just, put a contract out there for 100% of the budget. Although now Netflix is cash flowing directly a lot more than they used to. Typically, the traditional model that we're dealing with is a combination of pre-sales, tax incentives, and gap financing, which all of those three we can provide, and then maybe you need a bit of equity, private equity on top of that to get you where you need to be.
Okay, so that's the money you actually go out and hire your crew with and get
Correct.
the production going. James, can you tell me about the producer's rep? I would have had one on the panel, but I don't know.
I deal with a lot of them.
And what is their role in this puzzle?
Well, if you're working with a producer's rep, typically it's an individual or a partnership. Sometimes it's a law firm that will represent you in setting up distribution contracts. Sometimes they will bring you to a company like ours, which is a more established sales agency. Other times they may go ahead and do a deal with a direct exhibitor, whether it be a digital platform or premium cable company or someone wants to buy your theatrical rights. So they kind of work as an agent on your behalf to represent the picture to someone who wants to buy it. They can be very valuable in certain situations, and other times there may be an extra layer of commission that you don't necessarily need to pay for. So before engaging any sort of representation on your project, you should ask yourself, who do you need on your distribution team? And most people or most producers don't have the direct relationship with an acquisitions person at a digital platform or an international buyer. For example, we're at all the foreign markets, so you're not going to know the folks at M6 in France or Jetson Hayushi in China. I mean, those are the people we deal with on a daily basis. So you're going to need some sort of representation to find direct exhibitors in foreign countries. So that a producer's rep is another form of a sales agent who can be very helpful.
Now, a lot of movies that I see go to video on demand, and they get that kind of distribution, and they might be capable of being seen by millions and millions of people online, but if nobody ever knows about it, it's worthless. So how do you make sure that you get good advertising in the deal so that it can be publicized?
What's the advertising accomplishing, I guess? As a producer, if you are looking to hand off the distribution services or the distribution effort of your film, then that advertising is really up to whoever the buyer is going to be, and they're going to invest the advertising dollars that I think makes sense for what they need to achieve in terms of their recoupment of their costs in any advance they would have paid for your film. If you're looking at it from a vanity standpoint, I want everybody to know about my film. Well, I mean, there's definitely different models of self-distribution out there, but then you're putting that hat on, and that's going to be an interesting experience, having done it myself. So I think if you're going out with a picture and you're dealing with a significant buyer, a U.S. cable premium network, or an all rights buyer, maybe you're dealing with a A24 or someone like that, then they're going to put advertising dollars behind ensuring that that picture is exposed to the type of audience they want to pay to see the movie. And video on demand is not necessarily bad. We've been negotiating deals directly with the cable in demand on cable VOD, and they focus exactly where they know their audience is. It may not be on billboards all over town, but for that video on demand consumer, they're getting the promotions to consume the film that in demand believes is valuable. So I think it's you kind of look at it two different ways. You hand off your movie, so they're going to market it as they see fit, and hopefully it aligns with the type of exposure you want it for your film.
How about to get a theatrical release? Is there any way to get a little pressure there so that you can
make one hell of a movie?
Yeah. Okay.
Give me something that has some big stars and gets people talking, and I'll get you a theatrical release.
Briana, what are some of the pitfalls that you've commonly seen?
Where to begin?
Pick a few.
I'd say one that happens in this business a lot is that you might have an independent producer who meets, let's say, an actor who has written a screenplay, and they meet in yoga class or something, and they start moving towards producing this project, and they don't get the relationship dealt with contractually up front. And what happens as the project moves forward, there's an inequity between the independent producer and the represented talent, because of course the talent has agent, lawyer, manager, a full team protecting his or her interests. And so it can get to a point in a project where either the independent producer becomes less valuable to the project and there's the risk it can proceed without the producer, or when trying to negotiate out with the talent team, the producer makes a really bad deal because the producer doesn't have the right representation who knows how to negotiate that kind of deal and also has the relationships in order to kind of leverage that arrangement.
So the producer might feel like, I don't have the money to hire a lawyer. I just have to make my movie, but that's a big mistake.
It is, and I'd say, producers in Los Angeles are very lucky because there is a wide variety on offer among law firms that provide the scope of production legal services. I think one of the biggest mistakes I've seen in the selection of legal representation is making sure that the lawyer you pick actually does the thing that you're looking for. And it can go both ways because you don't want to pick a law firm that only works on $20 million features and up because they don't understand the nuances of independent film deal making at a low budget level, which is significantly different. And you need someone who understands both those nuances and how to communicate those nuances to the talent side when making those deals. So if you want to make a $100,000 feature, make sure that the law firm actually provides legal services for $100,000 features, and don't get in a position where you're paying 20% of your budget for your legal services, because that's not a great scenario either.
Adrian, the term bankable is thrown around a lot. How does somebody become bankable, and what does that really mean?
Yeah, I hear that a lot, and I don't know what it means, but I think, there's two parts to it from my point of view. One is, as a bank, we're heavily regulated. I mean, it's beyond, comprehension. So, there's the bankable side where we have to do background checks, and this isn't just for film lending. This is, you go into a bank and you want to open a bank account. They want to know everything about your life history these days. Where you went on holiday last, and what clubs did you join when you were a kid, kind of thing. So there's that sort of legal side of it, and the other side of it, which I think is more applicable, is is this, as a producer or anyone in that on that production team, are they reputable? Whether they've got experience or not. We've done a lot of films over the years with first-time producers, but somebody who's going to stand by that project and be there from start to finish. We've unfortunately had a few scenarios over the years where at the first sign of trouble or the loan's not getting fully repaid, even though these loans are not personally guaranteed, you'll be very glad to hear. The producer who just sort of shrugs his shoulders and walks away onto the next project, he's not going to be considered bankable the next time he goes into a bank and tries to make a movie. So it's really just reputation. It's really just you being a smart business person and doing what you can to not only get the bank's money back, but your investors' money and everybody else. No one goes into these projects thinking they're going to lose money, but things do happen, especially today in a very soft international market. You've got to be very careful how you put together the project from the very start. And to me, that's more sort of, what bankable means. It's, you know what you're doing, and you're not just kind of taking a punt and seeing, hoping that it works.
Yeah, I have these producers that come to me, and they're very excited. They have what they think is a deal from a distributor. If they can get Robert De Niro in their $1 million movie, they have a deal. But they don't even know how to get a hold of Robert De Niro. So how does that work, James?
Boy, you're giving me the fun questions tonight. I guess my answer to that is about teamwork. And it actually kind of goes to how we came together. Jim shot Break, which was the first movie I produced A to Z. But everybody else around me was so much more experienced, and I don't think I'd be here today if I didn't have Jim or Gabe or director or the crew you brought. So you want Robert De Niro, you're going to have to build a team that justifies Robert De Niro regardless of the budget. Yeah, $1 million is probably not going to happen, but you never know. I mean, it could be a passion project. But I think more importantly is who's on your team, and can that team rise to that level to produce the type of film that you want to make. And don't be shy of being the least experienced or the least knowing on the team. Surround yourself with people a lot more experienced, a lot more relationship connected. This is a business where it's less about who you know, but who knows you. And the relationships here are so important. So I'd say build a team. And if you want Robert De Niro, then find out who's worked with them and try to build a relationship with those people. You never know. I mean, it's a long shot, but teams are what get great films made in this town.
Yeah, good answer. What do you see as the state of the indie movie scene right now, Briana? I'm going to ask everybody this.
I think it's an interesting and tough time. 5 to 10 years ago, it was really easy to cast an independent film with TV actors who were looking to, get into movies because that was the dream. So every business has its ups and downs. So the corresponding movement, because of the rise of what everyone is still calling peak TV, is there is so much in production in television that I think it's much harder availability-wise, financially in order to get people to come onto low budget films. And so it goes to that point about passion projects. And so I think now one of the things that people really need to pursue is putting passion projects together and getting the right team in place as well, because people still want to see movies. They want to experience amazing untold stories, and so it has to be done well, and it can't be exactly what 50 other people are doing, and so it has to be unique in some way, and hopefully it'll all come together.
Adrian, what do you see as the state of the union?
Well, you know, I'm actually pretty bullish on the independent filmmaking. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that doesn't get talked about a lot or enough maybe is, you know, you can go to 30, 40 different states around the U.S. and, you know, probably a similar number of countries around the world, and they have very good tax incentives, you know, which is basically free money. You know, you go in there, you're generating income in a local economy, tourism, etc., and they're paying you to be there. You know, and that can be 20, 30, in some places 40% of your budget right there. So there's not many other industries, you know, that are sort of subsidized to that sort of extent. Having said that, there's a lot of challenges in the sales market internationally. I think that's you know, probably a bit of a correction in that a lot of films were made, you know, over in different periods that probably shouldn't have been made because there was money available from different sources that wasn't really tied to commercial, you know, results. So there's a correction, and people are having to adjust to that. But you know, it's difficult to make a movie. But I think with the advent of, you know, these different platforms and the widening circle of diversity in filmmaking, that there's more opportunities for people to get their story out there. It's never going to be easy, but I think there's more options depending on how you want to finance it.
And how does players like Netflix and Amazon, how do they play into the scene? James?
Tagging on to what Adrian said, we're bullish too, and I don't see Netflix as competition. I see them as a partner, or Amazon, or any other company. This is an independent film finance discussion, but I would say we're all in independent production. And whether the buyer is Netflix or the buyer is Lightning Entertainment or someone else, the goal is to make content that people want to see. And consumers are changing how they consume content, on what devices they use to consume content, and even what format or time length the content is. You're having shows that are each episode's a different length of time. You have movies that are just being released on a Netflix. So independent film or independent production, as you say it, I think it's booming. I think it's exciting. I think the market and the world and the business is radically changing so quickly that it scares a lot of people. So bravo to you for sitting in an audience and trying to be proactive and learning and being ahead of the curve. But I welcome Netflix. I welcome Amazon. We're pitching projects to them that will never be seen in theaters, but they will pay the type of dollars that get those independent projects made. And we're promoting those filmmakers and trying to explain to them, we'd love to see it theatrically too, but here's a way to make a living.
How do you approach them?
How do you approach them?
Yeah, put on your producer's hat now.
You work with a company that, I mean, if you have a relationship, I mean, Netflix is interesting in that they're kind of decentralized in how they do acquisitions. There's a lot of people who can greenlight a project at Netflix, so you just have to start knocking on doors and you'll start getting pitch meetings. You may get lucky. Other companies are a little bit more organized and have more finite acquisition channels that you have to go through. We fortunately have a staff in our company that has those relationships. But as a producer, I would work with a sales company or a producer's rep if you don't have the relationships. But you never know. Maybe a friend of yours who's producing has had that relationship. Maybe you have great representation at a talent agency or a manager or a lawyer or a banker. I mean, everybody up here, I'm sure, has worked with those companies in some capacity or the other. I would go back to focusing on building a great project with a great team. because that will float to the top, and then people, whether it's your banker, your lawyer, a friend, a sales company, is going to feel comfortable taking those projects out because the right pieces are in place. So build your projects brilliantly, and they will find Netflix.
Briana, let's talk about sewing up the rights. That's a really important thing before you do anything, right? What are the steps involved?
So the first thing you have to do is it an existing property screenplay, or is it something you're having written? And then you need to look at whether, is it based on an underlying property? Is there a book in the background? Did someone's cousin write a short story? Is it based... This is the hardest kind of project to do something independently with. Is it based on a pre-existing entertainment property? Is it a sequel to a motion picture that you don't control the rights to, or is it a fan-based project? So you need to identify the source of the rights, and then you need to acquire them. Hiring a writer can be either very easy and cheap, or not easy and difficult, whether you're trying to go with a guild writer, which is someone who usually has a track record and tends to be a more professional level writer, or someone who isn't, which you can have amazing writers who aren't in the guild, but sometimes it can be harder to vet them. And so how much are you going to pay for the screenplay? Are you getting the rights outright? Is it only for a certain amount of time? A lawyer can walk you through all the steps in this process to ascertain what works for your budget, and also what's going to give you the most amount of time to get your project put together and shot.
Now, as a producer might buy a spec script, mm-hmm. how could they verify that it was an original story?
So in the contract, the rights holder, usually the author, has to make certain representations and warranties that they own all of the rights that they're conveying. But there's also some background research that needs to go into it. You can do Copyright Office searches to see if someone else has registered that work, identifying them as the claimant for it. You can also sometimes identify whether there are other production companies with options on the agreement. And so normally your lawyer would ask for the writer's lawyer for information about what's called the chain of title to establish the rights background. And this is going to come into play with getting financing, whether you're dealing with private investors or with a bank. They're always going to want to make sure that the rights to the underlying property are secured, because they need to have collateral financially for the investment.
Adrian, I used to hear a lot about bonding. You had to be bondable. And I don't hear that so much anymore. Is it you still requiring a bond, completion bond?
We do for films. I think part of the reason you don't hear it as much is a lot more TV is made without completion bonds. And maybe some of the large budget things, but a lot of independent television where you have a sort of a keystone broadcaster you don't really need it, and we will lend into a TV show that doesn't have a bond. But on the film side, tradition is that you have a completion bond, because the big part or a portion of the money that pays us back is tied to delivery of the film. And if delivery is never made, then all those distributors don't have to pay us. And we're not in the business of taking production risk. So, especially in cases where, not even just for sort of straightforward, productions, but international co-productions and things that are very complicated, or shooting on, a lot of locations and that sort of thing. So, the problem is that the bonding companies have, sort of generally set a bit of a minimum size budget that they will, below which they won't go, they won't bond, because it's just not economical for them. And that these days is probably around somewhere between $2 and $3 million. So if you're making $1 million movies, or even less than that,
You're on your own.
You're going to struggle to find a bond. Therefore, you're going to struggle to find certainly bank financing, and increasingly, even private investors, sometimes require a completion bond. So, I would say we are in a period where there are a number of bonding companies, and I think that will generate a little more competition. And if you can go to them and say, look, I've got a small budget movie, but I'm planning on doing more things down the road or a bigger thing next, and you'll get my business if you'll, step out of your little box. You can get a bond, but obviously on those smaller budget movies, the cost of it, they're going to charge you a flat fee rather than a percentage of the budget.
James, I've worked on a lot of movies over the years, and a lot of digital movies in the last 10 years, and I don't know that they've ever been as successful as the little one that I shot for you. Can you tell us the story of Break?
Well, I go back to my team discussion. It was a great team. So Gabe Torres, our director, knew my former business partner and I, and we were looking for a project for quite some time. I had worked for other producers. I'd been an associate producer. I helped other producers. I'd come from finance. I didn't go to film school. I loved movies, and I fell into the film business helping a friend turn a upside-down production company right side up, and I just became enamored and passionate about the business side of film. And I thought I'd try to make a movie on my own, which became quite a learning experience. But we were trying to package another picture and trying to raise financing and trying to raise $5 million and not quite knowing what we were doing, but obviously trying to raise too much money. And the investors came back and said, if you can do something for under $1 million, we'll invest with you. And that's where Gabe found this script, Break, through a coverage company that he knew. And we read it, we loved it. It was contained. It took place, the whole movie took place in the trunk of a car. So one location, on one soundstage, and we shot it out in 11 days. And Gabe knew Steven Dorff, and Steven's agents knew Tom Berenger, and I credit the crew, I credit our DP, I credit everybody who made it look great, and it literally is Die Hard in the trunk of a car, and it became this 90-minute action ride, and we just beat up Steven Dorff, but it had a storyline, it had an arc, and didn't know anything about distribution, but my former business partner, he was his wife was a pretty well-known actress, and they had a law firm, and they had a producer's rep company actually, and we signed with them. And they shopped us to sales companies like Lightning. Coincidentally, Lightning was one of the companies that we met with. And they shopped us to domestic distributors. And IFC bought the domestic rights for a MG and put out a mini theatrical release. And coincidentally, Lightning bought the international rights for an MG and took it out internationally. And it performed. And I think it's a testament to a great team, great production value, but making the film at the right price point, and not being pragmatic. We were overambitious on the first project we're trying to package, but the first one, which happened to be 10% of the size, budget-wise, of the first project, became the one that actually got made, and it ended up returning not only its money, but its premium to the investors, and it still kicks off a check every year. It's still playing on Showtime. It's become a great little film that could. And got me going in this business. So that's the story of Break.
May we all be so lucky. Briana, tell us a little bit, tell us some stories, tell us some horror stories. What are some of the mistakes that you've seen people make that maybe you can warn these people about? I asked about pitfalls before, but I know you have some stories.
So
no names, but
no names, no identifying characteristics. One of the things I have liked best about working with independent producers is how it's really like the old-fashioned sense of let's put on a show. You have to pull all the pieces together. You have to get people, especially when you're working at lower budget levels, you have to get people invested in your project, because usually you're asking them to work for little to no money, to give up their nights and weekends, possibly spend time away from their family. So there has to be that sort of centralizing force to projects. But sometimes that force can be used in the wrong way. So I will say, it's good to have a team around you who can help provide ballast to maybe the more impulsive tendencies. I worked with a producer who spent his entire life savings, that of, an assortment of friends and family as well, making, a movie that was not really sellable in terms from the script level on. And I think if he had some trusted advisors involved earlier on who could have had, sometimes you have to have really hard conversations about projects, about managing expectations, both in terms of where it can end up, who is the audience. These are all things, because ultimately filmmaking is a business, and someone involved has to have some business sense. I'm trying to think of another horror story. There are too many.
Are there any where somebody goes way down the road and then they didn't own the rights to something and they can't do anything with it?
Well, I will say on one of the first projects I worked on, I was getting the chain of title paperwork into SAG, and I don't think it was a WGA film, so it was WGA. So I sent in, and it was my first time working with this producer. So I was very green. So I sent in the screenplay agreements there had been a few writers on the project, and I got a call from our rep and was like, who's so-and-so? And I was like, what do you mean? This name and this based on a story by Bob. I was like, I have no idea. There's no Bob anywhere in these documents. So I asked the producer, he's like, oh, I just threw that in there because I wanted to mess with the writer. And I was like, so Bob, at this point in time, is now a high-powered agent at one of the agencies. So I had to call Bob, and there's always this, is he going to hold us up for money? Is he just going to play ball and sign, a little one-page agreement giving us the rights? So luckily he played ball, but it was literally the week before production started. So you have a lot depending on you at that point in time.
It's a house of cards, isn't it? And when something goes wrong, the whole so many times I get that close to starting production and it all falls through.
Well, because, financing falls through all the time at the last minute. I've had, I think we've all probably had experiences with people have traveled. You've been in pre-production, you have people on the ground, and something goes wrong. And it's not bonded, there's no one to take over.
Any war stories for you, Adrian?
Yeah, plenty. I think one of the it was a war story, but it sort of worked out well. There was a producer that I worked with many years ago, and he had two projects that he was pushing sort of simultaneously, and we had financed a small film for him, and it had done okay, and then he came back. And he kept talking to me about these films, and he was trying to attach talent. He was trying to get directors. He was, and the whole process on both of these films, for one of them it was 7 years, the other one it was 8 years. And in the meantime, he'd made other movies, but these were his babies. These are the things that he, and I kept just telling him, I said, look, you've just got to, move on. The market's telling you. He goes, no, I really believe in it. We sort of fell out of touch. He went off and did some other things, and I sort of changed banks, and then I bumped into him years later, and I said, hey, what happened to those two films? I told you, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, well, one of them I got a call from Steven Spielberg's company, and he made that movie, and the other one, yeah, it turned into a little movie that, whoever studio picked up. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, one of them is I, Robot, and the other one was Catch Me If You Can.
Wow.
Yeah. And I said, well, there you go. I told you that they're going to be wonderful pieces of business. And, so, and it just sort of summed up the industry to me. It was like so frustrating, but he had such a strong belief in them. And he was lucky enough that he got to make other films in the meantime to pay the mortgage and everything. But, it worked out. He actually, it was funny because he was actually a little bit regretful because the studios took over the movies. He got paid very well, but he ended up not really being the, credited as the lead producer. And so he, it's still a little bit tinged. And I said, well, now you've bought your nice house in, up in the hills and everything. I think you'll get over it.
Well, let's talk about technology for a minute, because that's what we usually yak about at Digital Cinema Society. James, do distributors care if things are shot in 4K? Do you want it
Most definitely. That's a
future-proof now?
It's a delivery requirement. TVs and exhibition has not really gone above that. So I know going to NAB, it's great to see 16K in the future, but 4K really is the standard for delivery. Even if you are blessed to shoot your film on film, we need digital delivery in 4K. That is a mandatory requirement. We won't take a film without it.
Wow, okay. That's changed a lot in the last couple of years. I mean, people were shooting on 4K, but nobody was finishing on 4K. But now that's a requirement for you, huh?
Yeah. Can't do anything with your movie without it.
Any other delivery specs that people might not be aware
Chain
of?
of title, you're legal. Make sure you were clean in production, because we're going to ask to see everything on delivery. And if we can't vet it, I can't put my E&O on it, and I can't take your movie out. So, plain and simple. Get your legal done quick or clean ahead of time.
How about other technical specs?
Oh man, I should brought my.
There's a lot. I mean, you have
my
pages
tech team
probably,
over.
yeah.
I can pull out an SAA and show you the whole 4 pages of exhibits. But it's not rocket science. I mean, it's pretty standard. We like 5.1. We don't need 7.1. So, I mean, pretty much your M&E.
Are they still asking for standard def? That
I don't. Yeah, I can't
not
use
anymore.
standard def. No.
Nobody cares.
Maybe somewhere in Eastern Europe, but I've not had a standard def delivery that I can think of in the 3 years I've been at Lightning.
Yeah, and how about archival value? Is it? Do you specify that that they back up their material in any certain way?
Well, I mean, from our point of view, when we're financing into a film, the materials, again, the bond company is taking the majority of the production risk, but it used to be that you'd have a lab pledge holder agreement, and all the materials were held in that lab, and no one could move them without us and other people signing off. But of course now you've got a film on a thumb drive.
Yes.
And
We do require a lab. Yeah. Like we only will certify certain labs in town, and your film has to be gone through that QC process with that lab and be held at that lab.
Interesting. Well, what do you see for the future of the business? Let's go down the row. Okay. Start with you.
Well, I mean, I think, panels like this obviously will illustrate the point that it takes a lot of people to get stuff done. That's not anything new. But I think from a producer's point of view, the single biggest thing that you have to stay current with, something that James talked about, is you've got to adapt to what the marketplace is doing. You can't just go forward and think, I'm gonna blow through this. I'm going to make the movie I want to make with the people I want to make it with for the budget that I want to make it for, because that may have been viable 2 years ago or a year ago, but today that's all changed. I mean, I think there's I look at the two sort of groups of people that I'm dealing with, and there's those that have adapted and those that haven't. And the guys that haven't, we're having the same conversations every 6 months, and it just goes on and on. The guys that have adapted are saying, they've taken that script and they've rewritten it, and they've looked at different actors and, trying to put as much value on the screen as opposed to everybody getting paydays, and, and you do, notwithstanding the example I just gave, you do have to move on when the market doesn't react. And if you get the film, you get a project to the point with a sales agent, and you can't make pre-sales, the market says we're not taking that leap of faith at that point, then chances are it's not going to sell well as a finished film, unless something spectacular happens. But So you got to find material that's going to be broadly commercial. You got to make it for a very efficient budget, and then you've got to find the best possible distribution channel that you can get. And I think the other issue is that people tend to, say yes to the first person that comes along and expresses an interest, and that might not be the right fit for that film. There's certain films that certain sales companies and distributors, will have an affinity for, and it may not be someone that's in your circle of friends or contacts, but you've got to go outside of that and find them, because that's the only way you're going to maximize the commercial value of the project.
I've experienced that where the producer is so hard up for cash because he mortgaged his house to
absolutely.
to finish the movie, and he just takes the
you
first
don't want to
offer.
wait, but waiting, recalibrating, doing something differently may probably will end up being a better strategy.
What do you see for the future, Briana?
Well, I think people are going to continue making independent film projects, and I think that the accessibility of the technology for people to see those projects is going to continue to expand. I think that one of the things that independent producers really need to do as well, though, is manage their expectations and also stay aware of what is happening with those developments. And in terms of what to expect, where is your film going to end up? How much money do you realistically expect to make? Because that's one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions I've had to deal with independent producers over the years, is the idea that you just make your film and suddenly you have a huge deal. And one of, I think, the most counterintuitive notions of making independent film is making the film itself is this tiny little, it's like having a child. It's the pregnancy part of having a child. It's like a short period of time. The real work comes in once you lock picture and you're trying to bring your child, your film, into the world. And that's where a lot of the hard work comes in. And I think a lot of people don't psychologically prepare for that.
James, what do you see for the future?
I concur with both of them in that you only get one shot at distribution. One shot. You can go reshoot a scene. You can rewrite a script. But once you take that film out, you don't get a second chance. And I mean, case in point, I'm not going to name the film. We're chasing the picture right now for AFM, and it's perfect for AFM, and it already filed its copyright. It's got a 2018 year on it. They think that they can take their time and they miss it. The producers told me, well, we'll just take it to Berlin or Cannes, or maybe wait for next year's AFM. And what they don't understand is buyers, the international marketplace, as Adrian pointed soft, if they see a 2018 copyright date filed on IMDb, next year you're taking out the AFM as an old movie. They're going to discount their costs. Even the movie hasn't been seen yet. And so I'm trying to explain to these producers, you are navigating a minefield here, and you are jeopardizing a movie you've put $5 million of someone else's money into, and it's a creature genre movie. This doesn't go to Berlin, this doesn't go to Cannes, this goes to AFM, and I can probably get them a substantial amount of sales at AFM, but they're waiting to see if they can get other offers before AFM. So distribution is really key. You have to plan for that early on, and I know you want to focus on production, you want to focus on creative, but you got to have those distribution discussions at a very early stage, and have a plan of action so when the film is done, you're not trying to figure it out then. You already know what your plan A, your plan B is going to be, and you can execute with confidence rather than being in a defensive posture trying to save your film or put money in your pocket or whatever it is.
What do you think about going to the festival circuit compared to just trying to go straight for distribution?
Depends on the picture. We have one movie that we're putting together, and it's got an Academy Award-winning actress attached, and it's a art house picture that's meant for the festivals. The financier knows it's festival-driven. We're not going to do pre-sales. It's being cash flowed specifically by the investor for this purpose. That's being designed as a festival-driven picture, and we're talking to publicists early on, so even when the picture's announced coming together, there's going to be a publicity plan in place during production. Now and then, if your passion project warrants a festival run, maybe that can be put together post-production, but for the most part, if you're making a commercial picture, you're going to want to have maybe a market in plan to go take it out initially, to go sell it for. We've become less market-centric. I know I'm pointing out AFM because this particular picture has enough production value where it deserves a screening and a buyer invite at AFM, but other pictures will sell off-market. Festivals are great. It's a great place for filmmakers to celebrate, but does it help the picture? Is it a worthwhile cost? Like this other picture we're dealing with a known actress, it makes sense. There's a team. Her agency wants to get behind it. The financier has done those type of movies. There's a domestic player who wants to get behind it. So that makes sense because someone's going to write the festival run budget for that. If you want a substantial festival run, and there's different classes of festivals too. That's a whole different discussion. As a sales company, we really avoid festivals because they don't really help the financial performance of the picture unless you have those big elements like I just explained.
And the big festivals.
And the big festivals.
I mean, there's great Sundance.
Yeah, I mean, there's Sundance, there's Toronto. I mean, there's Telluride, there's Tribeca. There's all great. Then there's a plethora of specific niche festivals. My motorcycle documentary, it's still playing in I didn't know this. There's a whole community of motorcycle film festivals. Like literally, there's dozens of them, and they get together and they have motorcycle movies. It plays. We license it for free, and there's a couple hundred people in France or wherever watching it and downloading it. I'm happy for that. So festivals is a completely different world.
But if you premiere at the Bakersfield Film Festival, don't expect too much, I guess.
Don't put that anywhere on a one sheet, please.
I'm going to turn it over to some questions from the audience, but I want to ask you first, what did I forget to ask you, Adrian? Any points you want to make that I didn't ask about?
No, I think you did a great job, Jim. I think, I think from my point of view, there's no mystique to what we do at the Banc. We're not, we try not to be that monolith where some big banks are, and I don't need a business plan. I don't need 500 pages of why you're making the greatest film ever. All I need is just a conversation, and then the numbers will change 100 times throughout the process. But we try to be very approachable, and if you've got an idea or thoughts about how your film's going to get financed, then share them with me, and I'm happy to share some of the experiences we've been through with other producers and what may work, and what might not work, or different approaches. But it's always going to be a collaboration. So we try not to be that big scary bank. And I do think that can also be said for like the bonding company, sales agents. Maybe not the talent agencies, they're bastards, but
I concur.
Yeah, I mean, I find a lot of, I do a number of these panels, and other people from those companies are there, and it's all very just trying to help you, and ultimately, obviously, we want to do some business, and we want to make it work, but we're specialists, so you don't have to be, and that I think is a big takeaway. I mean, when we start talking about all these legal points, I mean, my eyes glaze over because that's why we're going to hire you to do the legal work, so I don't have to know all those things, and I can trust in you doing your job and me doing my job and James doing his job. So you're leading the way as the producer and just aggregating those different specialists and getting you where you need to be.
So you're open to talk to people?
Absolutely.
And where can they find you?
1-800-BANKER. No, I bought some business cards, but you can look me up on the Bank's website. I might be somewhere on there.
What did I forget to ask you, Briana?
Well, I would say when you're talking to a lawyer about working together on your project, make sure you really understand what you're getting for whatever they're charging you. Because you might find someone who's going to give you a really great rate on a production legal package, but you need to know what that package is. Is it just form agreements? Are they going to negotiate any of the deals for you? are they going to be available to take your panicked call at 10 o'clock at night when something has gone south on set? So you really need to have those conversations up front so you have a good idea about what you're getting for your money. Because there's nothing, I've received those calls from people who are like, what do I do? I can't get a response on this. And I'm like, well, here's how you navigate this process. Because your lawyer, I think, in many ways is the counselor who can help not just with legal documents, but help navigate the waters generally in terms of, risk avoidance and...
What is the deal that when you hire a lawyer, is it by the hour, or is it a percentage of the budget, flat fee?
So it could be any combination of the above. So talent is usually the ones who, have the 5% arrangement with their lawyer. Production lawyers, often what you'll find is it will be fee hour or possibly a flat fee, like by discrete chunk during the development phase. And then when it moves into pre-production, it will move into, and so many production lawyers will do a percentage of the budget. What I often prefer doing is taking a holistic approach at what the production entails. Do you have minors? Are there stunts? Is there fire? Do you have fire in the valley in the middle of summer? These things all add on extra legal wrinkles and take more legal time. And perversely, the lowest budget projects usually entail the most amount of legal time because everyone's trying to kind of remake everything and you can't just run the deals through. So I guess that's a long answer to talk to the lawyer, because lawyers often offer different packages and different ways to structure the arrangement. And if it's someone who works with independent filmmakers a lot, they understand the financial landscape, and but they also understand how much legal work might need to go into something, because I think there is no more popular saying, but it's only a 2-page contract.
And you should cast your lawyer just like you cast your crew and your actors, right? And get the right one that's right for your project.
Yeah, and it needs to be someone that you feel comfortable. You need to be able to ask your lawyer questions and feel comfortable doing so and not be embarrassed or be like, I can't believe I don't know this. Because that one question ultimately can save you so much time and headache. I have producers I haven't worked with in years because, they've gone on to do other things, but they still... we still have a relationship because you spend so much time together during that, on the phone. I've never met many of my clients, but during that process, working through this stuff. You're often dealing with people during very high pressure situations where, like, I have millions of dollars, everyone's relying on me, things are going wrong, or everything's going right. And to be able to work through those situations together is really important.
James, what did I forget to ask you?
You asked a lot of great questions, but maybe how do we get engaged? Maybe from a deal structure, kind of a macro point of view, or so as a sales agency, we represent your film. We don't own your movie. You sign a multi-year contract. Typically, it's in excess of 10 years because the deals will be entering into your behalf or at that time frame or longer. And we get a commission for doing the sale. We also get our costs recouped. And sometimes, certain cases, depending on how much marketing effort we put into it internationally, we may take a marketing fee associated with that so that we're not nickel and diming you for flights and travel and that kind of stuff. It's a flat fee. And all that comes off the top. And I share this because when I was selling Break and we were negotiating with our sales agent, I didn't know any of this, and it was a shock. I thought, the sales agent should just eat all that. That's part of their cost of doing business, and we should just enjoy everything on the gross. And I came to a very real realization that that the film is going to pay everybody. And that's just the way it is, and it's fine. You just have to design your financing model to ensure that you have that margin built in, and you understand that, and you know what that is going into a deal, and you negotiate what you feel is fair in terms of commission and fees for the work that's being performed by your representation on the sales side. And so, just how you engage with the sales agent. So,
Are there less reputable companies that will jack up those costs?
I don't want to talk negative about my competition, but it's agencies, all the deals, so I'm not going to finance that. But it's up to you. I mean, it's your film. You have to negotiate good deals for yourself. So I wouldn't say less reputable. There's different types of distributors and sales companies that focus on different types of films. And some of them buy a lot of low-budget pictures, or represent a lot of low-budget pictures, which is fine. That's their specialty. But then you realize you're not going to get as much maybe interaction with them because that's just, they're taking on so much more films, and there's just so much time they can give to each one project. And they have to charge a higher fee or commission because the revenue for the smaller films is smaller, and they have to keep their lights on. So I wouldn't call them less reputable. It's just the reality of where that film ends up in the marketplace. Whereas higher value projects like the one I mentioned to you that may get a festival run or an awards run, that one we're having to take a low sales fee, even though we brokered the financing. I brought 100% of the financing on the project, but the talent's agents are a major agency, and they want to co-rep it, and so we're going to take a small fee, but it's worth it. I mean, it's a prestige project that may make us enough to keep the lights on, but gives us something proud to be a part of. So it comes down to each deal's different. Trust your gut. You're all really smart. If you're doing a deal with someone to represent your film and they're going to take your film to the marketplace, do you like them? Do you feel comfortable? Do they call you back? Do you have a relationship? We're all your partners. If you don't feel like that's there, then there's plenty of people in this business you can go and, or plenty of other people in this business, especially sales agents, you can go talk to. So
you would be a sales agent or distributor, right?
I would call it a sales agent
okay.
Because we don't physically exhibit the film, though we do arrange for certain festival exhibitions. We're not Netflix. We would sell or license the rights on your behalf as an agent. So our sales agency agreement will state Lightning Entertainment Group, Inc. as an agent for XYZ LLC, which would be your single purpose production entity or whatever entity you created to hold the rights to the picture. And in many times, we're a little bit more engaged than just a third-party sales agent. We don't really go to the festivals just to write a check to buy a movie. We get involved in when there's a producer and a director, and we try to bring some value, whether it's just estimates to closure financing or really an equity player to help round out the financing so that it works with Adrian or some other banker.
Now, if there was a producer's rep, that producer's rep would deal with you? That would be the one negotiating?
Sometimes we have producers reps submit projects all the time, but sometimes they've got relationships directly with a platform like Netflix. So depends. A lot of times the producers reps don't have the servicing capacity that a sales agency have. So we have a in-house servicing department that handles delivery of all the materials needed to deliver for what Netflix needs versus what all rights buyer would need or a cable broadcaster would need. Also, we have the collections ability. We run rights management. We have a back office that handles accounting, whether we're handling the collections or we're using a third-party collection account management company. You'll start hearing the names of Freeway, Vintage, and others in the business. And that's really helpful, too, because it keeps everybody honest. There's a third party that's collecting the money and dispersing it.
It's international, too, so it must get very complicated.
What's nice about a collection company, I'm probably giving you more information than you wanted to know, but it helps with the currency tax. So that's another issue, is your film gets distributed in a foreign country and they slap 50% tax or 30% tax on the revenue because it's coming over the U.S. in dollars. So we funnel money through Hungary or other countries to minimize currency tax. And that's another benefit of using a third-party collection account.
The talent representatives might insist on it.
Yes, a lot of times talent will, especially if you're dealing with higher caliber talent, and it also helps with guilds. We don't take your guild obligations. You as a producer do. So you're responsible now. Usually, when you're doing a domestic contract, you do a guild obligation deal with your domestic distributor, but But as the guilds become more and more savvy to digital distribution, I can see them grabbing more and more of international distribution revenue. And it's nice to have a third-party collection company doing a guild reserve and ensuring that the money's reported to the payroll house that's handling the guild residuals. First of all, they're getting harder and harder. It is a soft market, as Adrian said. International buyers like to see talent, and that's both on the directing side and the acting side. So you're going to need, for lack of a better analogy, bankable talent. It's tougher to just sell a movie just on a script or spec. In the 3 years I've been at Lightning, we have not done that. We have done pre-sales, but they've had talent attached and other key elements. So have your equity in place, or at least have it close to being in place. We don't like to go out and pre-sell a movie if we're the first ones putting money to the film. We like to see a finance plan that is pretty bulletproof, meaning there is a realistic equity player either contracted or needs to be contracted because of pre-sales, and we vet that equity player, so we want to talk to your investor or see proof that that investor is legitimate. And then it's having the type of talent and director. Director's just as important for us, at least we've seen in the sales business. We need a director. And pre-sales are really driven by commercial projects, less than art house. So trying to tell some small town story that's going to be, or a US-centric story, that's going to be tough for pre-sales. Try to deal with something that's universal, an action film, or something that can cross oceans and continents and that we can pre-sell to people who don't speak English. I'll plug a book that I think is extremely valuable that came out this year called The Big Picture by Dan Fritz, and it's The Big Picture, The Future of Movies. And it's probably the most insightful, up-to-date book I've read about what's going on so quickly in the independent production business. The first half is more about studio, but the second half is really topical to what this discussion is about. And the international consumer and the international marketplace is becoming more and more mature. Netflix's #1 film this past summer was an Indian production called The Indian Detective, I think it was. You're seeing more of the US digital platforms creating international productions for regional audiences. So American films are no longer the only thing that international audiences have to choose from. They can choose from local language productions, and they're being made at top budgets by major international media corporations. So that's putting extreme pressure on international pre-sales because you don't have the market demand really for American films as much as, not that they can't travel, but the ones that are traveling are really the studio tentpoles, the comic book movies, which are universal stories. So that goes back to your question. And that's why you're seeing such success with the Marvel movies and the DC comic movies and such forth. Though this is independent, the studios are able to travel pretty wide internationally because those brands, those stories, work so well in any language in any world. You're universal. So an American production has to appeal to an international audience more and more today than it ever had to do in the past.
Can I
Please.
just add something? So generally speaking, depending on budget and the elements, but a lot of the finance plans that we're looking at, people are aiming to get somewhere between 15 and 30% of the budget pre-sold. Most of the time, those are international pre-sales. A lot of the domestic distributors do not want to commit at that early sort of stage. They'll tell you, when you have a finished film, come back and we'll take a look. So from the get-go, unless it's not a broadly commercial film, you've got to target that kind of level of pre-sales, because then you can back into, okay, I can get 20% as a tax incentive. The bank might also give me 10 or 15% of gap financing, and then that leaves me 20 or something percent, to find as equity. And that equity generally is sort of a plug against the domestic rights. And then when you've got a finished film, the theory is that those remaining unsold rights are more valuable because you can show them the film and they can, see it. So it's so having that model as a starting point helps guide you in terms of what you're spending and what the talent level and all those kind of things that you've got to juggle to go out to the market and make those actual sales.
You're going to need to have star power. that's going to have to carry that picture. You're going to need to have a known director at that level. I mean, now and then I've seen less experienced or a first-time director come up, but they're surrounded with, again, that team, that caliber of talent, and it's usually with the on-screen talent, and a producing partner, if you don't already have the relationships, who's worked at that caliber, and then you have some good, hopefully better odds than not.
Would you require errors and omission insurance before you would loan money to a film?
Yeah, I mean, as well as the completion bond, we need, E&O insurance, the production package insurance. In cases where you've got the distribution agreements are predicated on a particular actor, then you might need essential element insurance as well. So you have to be very precise how you're putting those elements together and the basis on which the sales agent is making the sales. Because if, and the other side of that is, if the sales agent is selling, oh yes, this guy's going to be in the movie for sure, but it's not covered by essential element insurance, then that guy doesn't have to be in the movie. And you can deliver a film with, somebody, we had a situation.
A lookalike.
Yeah, I mean, we had a situation years ago where it was an Anthony Hopkins movie, and the long and the short of it was, the film was totally transformed. And it ended up being Gary Busey. So, so some of the buyers were a little bit surprised to find Gary Busey, in the lead role that was, should have been, Hannibal Lecter, but that's why you have to have that, be very precise about how you're doing it and get that insurance.
One of the defenses to such uses is called the fair use defense, and one of the carve-outs in that area is parody. There are a lot of legal principles at play in those concepts, so I'm oversimplifying here.
Yes. Okay. But it could be risky.
It could be risky.
Which would cause the banker to say, I'm not going to loan them money.
Exactly, and it will come up on your errors and omissions policy, whether you've used a pre-existing piece of music without clearing it, or you have there are numerous ways this can play out in terms of, this is why you want someone who's really good on your set to make sure you're not, filming a very particular piece of artwork, because that could lead to an issue down the road. Yeah. Not a satire issue, but a liability issue.
I mean, some of the situations we've seen, you've got very clear-cut copyright infringements if you start throwing in, Mickey Mouse in the movie or whatever, and certainly if it's a certain type of movie. And then on the other side of it, I mean, basically, you can sue anybody for anything. I mean, you just have to be very smart with it. I mean, you can say certain things about people before you start getting into slander and libel issues, even though they're very hard to prove in a court of law.
Oh, Briana needs more work. No, I don't think so. He would like to know maybe not only what the value is to attending AFM, but at what stage in the production or pre-production might he go there?
We typically don't acquire projects at AFM. We're so busy focused on selling. Does not mean we wouldn't take a producer meeting, but it doesn't happen often because our schedules are pretty full with meeting buyers who've traveled across the world to come to the sales market to buy products. So I do think you should go. It's part of this business that most producers don't know about. I remember the first time I went to AFM as a producer, not as owning a sales company, and this was years before I came to Lightning, and it was eye-opening to see, wow, this is the circus where my movie ended up. But jokes aside, I think it's important to go. Walk around. You may get a meeting. Not to say you wouldn't. I would be less suggestive to just cold call sales companies because their calendars are busy. So if you wanted to meet with someone specifically, try to get on their calendar before AFM. That's the most productive way, and have an appointment at a sales office. So when you show up, they actually have time to meet with you, and they're not busy in something else. But getting a day pass and walking around and getting the buzz of the market, I think you should go. It's where movies are making their money.
And it's coming up in November, I think, in Santa Monica?
Actually, November 1st.
Yeah.
Yep.
If I can paraphrase, are there different budget levels that make sense?
That sounds like a question for someone who didn't talk to a sales company before they made their movie. What makes sense is the reasons you're making the film. If it's for a financial, you want to make your money back. I mean, there occasionally is a person who doesn't care about the return. They just want to tell the story. But for the vast majority of people, they like to at least see the money back. They know it's a risky endeavor, and hopefully they're not losing too much sleep at night after making the investment. But if they want to see the money back, you kind of have to have some distribution estimates. And you got to sit down while you're got enough elements together with a reputable producer's rep, sales company. Maybe you have a connection to Netflix or somewhere, and get a beat on what somebody would pay for the film. That's going to be your best insight into whether or not this is going to be worth it or not.
It all depends on the picture.
Yes.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, very generally speaking, if you're spending over $8 to $10 million on a budget, that film has to be theatrical. You're not going to make enough money out of, the other ancillary markets just to cover that generally. So if you're making a theatrical movie, it's a whole different landscape, because then you are going to need a higher level of talent, and that 10 million might end up being 25 million. Below that level, where you're not you're not reliant on a theatrical play as part of the economics of the film, then you have to decide, okay, identify the talent, and then the real work is in getting that talent for as little money as possible. So as much money of your budget is going up on the screen and not in the talent and these agents, pockets. So, what we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years is that what used to make sense as a $7 million movie then became a $5 million, $3 million, and now it might be $2 million. But maintaining that level of talent and that production value, and that really is the challenge today, because a lot of the foreign buyers for a non-theatrical film are going to pay a certain amount of money, and there'll be a ceiling to that, no matter whether your budget's $7 million or $2 million. They're going to pay $150,000 for Benelux or Australia. And if you extrapolate that around different, the worldwide territories, there's only a certain amount of revenue you're going to get in terms of fixed minimum guarantees, and then beyond that, you're reliant on overages and the film's performance and things like that. So it's a good question, and but that's why you engage with the sales agent very early on and ask them what are the economics of doing it different ways.
John would like to know, what do you look for in a team before you want to spend your time talking to them? What do you want to see?
Typically, the call or the meeting is coming through a referral. We don't take too many cold calls. I'm happy to meet with anybody here. You all know Jim, and you're all my friends now. But typically, yeah.
Don't blame me.
It's just time. I mean, the reality is we have families, we have kids, we have time, and time is valuable. So if it comes to a credible referral, we're more of a boutique company. We kind of have a short list of producers we talk to regularly, and then we'll meet with others as they get referred in. But in terms of a team, with experience, pragmatism, you're level-headed, you're realistic about what you're endeavoring to do. It doesn't have to be a $5 million movie or a $10 million movie. It can be a $500,000 movie if the elements are there. We're less budget concerned. We're more looking for the package, and that's why I said we're not really valuable at the script stage. We're really valuable when you have a producing team and a director, and you're looking to then attach your talent. Then we like to roll up our sleeves and say, okay, how do we help you get this picture made? If we responded to the material, we'll read it, but we need to know who the director and the producers are first.
And you wanted to ask of the others also, Briana? What does it take for you to answer the call?
Well, likewise, a lot of my business is referral based, often with producers I've worked with before, sometimes from talent reps, actually, when they've seen how we've handled productions we've worked on. At this point, it often is, again, looking at the whole package of a project, and then it's also always balanced against the realities of, you know, how many other productions we have going on and what the overall workload is. But there's always, at the minimum, you know, a discussion about the project. So a phone call is always taken.
You're open. And Adrian, you indicated you were open to talking to people.
Yeah, generally it's a single malt Scottish whiskey. That's my, you know.
Price of admission.
But if it's not that, then no, I you know, if you get me on the end of the phone, I'm always happy to talk. I mean, I would say, you know, I would say that go down as many roads as far as you can in terms of different things that you've got to put together. And, you know, because I'm going to ask you about the financing and the distribution and, you know, locations and what tax incentives and stuff like that. So, you know, obviously the more information you have to give back, the you know, the better the feedback can be. But I'm always open to a phone call.
Thank you, guys. Let's get specific. Adrian Ward from Banc of California, Briana Hill from a long name of a law office.
Our abbreviation is CDAS.
Oh, that's easier to say. I wasn't pronouncing it right anyway. And James C. Walker, the CEO of Lightning Entertainment. And thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.